everyone, this is Music Tech Help Guy, and welcome to part 45 of my ultimate guide to Logic Pro. In this video, I want to dive into some custom sample instrument design using Quick Sampler. And it's really great for importing individual drum samples, it's great for designing simple synth basses, pads, and leads, and it also has a really nifty slice mode, which can chop up loops and longer samples and map them across your keyboard. So in this video, I'll demonstrate how to use Quick Sampler to build custom instruments out of samples, and I'll also demonstrate how to build a beat and a musical example with only Quick Sampler instruments. And if you want to follow along with me, I'll leave a free Logic project download below. This project will contain all of the samples I use in this video, but I'll swap out any splice samples I use for similar samples. But before I get into the tutorial, I want to quickly tell you about the sponsor of this video, Boombox. Boombox.io is an awesome new music storage and audio file commenting tool that's perfect for musicians, producers, beat makers, and other collaborative music makers. With Boombox, you can upload your tracks, the site supports single file upload or batch upload, you can invite collaborators like other producers, other co-writers, bandmates, and others to comment on your tracks in the form of time-stamped feedback. If you want to check it out for yourself, head over to boombox.io where you can sign up for a free account today and get 4 gigabytes of free storage. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is load up Quick Sampler, so I'm just going to create a blank software instrument. And one way to do this is just to go to the Instrument tab here on any software instrument track, and then find Quick Sampler and load it up. I highly recommend loading it up in stereo, especially if the samples you are using are indeed in stereo. Now in Quick Sampler, you can drag or drop any audio file right here in this loading area. A way I love using Quick Sampler is with Splice. Splice is a pay-for app for finding loops and samples. And I've got a kick sample that I like here. So I want to drag this into Quick Sampler, so it's very easy. You just drag and drop it directly from Splice into Quick Sampler, and there you go. Now, another way to do this is you can actually drag and drop any sample outside of Logic into Logic directly in the tracks area. And then what I can do is I can go into Quick Sampler. I'll just go ahead and recall the default, and I can drag this sample into Quick Sampler to load it in. Now, one final way you can do this is you can drag any audio file or any sample from the tracks area onto a new track header, just like this. And you'll see that there's 2 options for Quick Sampler. So we have Quick Sampler Original and Quick Sampler Optimized. I'm going to show you Optimized first, and I'm going to go back to Original. So what Optimized does is it will sort of automatically tune the sample and try to predetermine certain information from the sample. Like it's already put this kick on E2 and it's detuned it by 12 cents. I actually just want the sample to play back normally, so I'm going to recall the default here, and I'm going to drag and drop this in again, and you can see that there's original mode. And so this uses the original tuning, loudness, looping, and length of the original sample, so it just leaves it as is. And now you can see that it's placed it on C3, and it has not detuned the sample at all. Now, typically, kick drum you don't want on C3, you want it on C1. That's the starting default pitch for kick drum based on the general MIDI drum map. That's why so many drum instruments start on C1 with kick drum. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on the root key here, and I'm going to change this to C1. As long as I have the track armed and I play C1 on my MIDI controller, I can hear this sample. Now, in addition to loading things into Quick Sampler, there's actually 3 different modes up here. You have Classic, One Shot, and Slice. Slice we're going to use later for chopping up drum loops, but both Classic and One Shot can be used for individual drum samples. I tend to use One Shot for individual drum samples because what this mode does is it plays the entire sample from beginning to end regardless of how long you hold down the key on your MIDI controller or regardless of how long the note is that you enter in. If I go back to classic mode, it's kind of hard to hear because it's a short sample, but if I play the key really quickly, you'll hear that the tail end of the note is not there, but if I hold down the key on my MIDI controller, you'll hear that full tail of the kick sample. So it's completely up to you which mode you want to use, but for drums, I tend to use one shot because it'll play the entire sample. Another thing you may notice is this is velocity sensitive. So if I play softer, I get a softer dynamic, and if I play harder, I get a louder dynamic. If you want to control this, you can do it right here in the bottom right corner. There's this velocity sensitivity slider that's paired to the main volume envelope here. We're going to cover most of these modulation controls in the next video. In this video, we're mainly just focusing on building instruments and getting started with these instruments. But if you want no velocity sensitivity, you can pull this slider all the way down, and every single note will be the same dynamic regardless of how hard or soft you hit the key on your MIDI controller. Or if you want just a little bit of velocity sensitivity like I do, you can try pulling this up just a little bit. I want all the kicks to be loud, I just want some of them to be a little softer than the others. And then if your kick is clipping or something, you can always pull down the main volume here. Okay, so let's build a really basic 4 on the floor kick pattern with this. For my song, I want to use like a triplet feel, so I'm going to change my LCD to custom, and I'm going to change the grid from 16th notes to /12, which is going to separate it into 8th note triplets. Then what I'll do is right-click or control-click and create a new pattern region, and you'll see that that note there, C1 for the kick, is shown as a row in the step sequencer. This is another really awesome thing about using the step sequencer along with Quick Sampler, is it automatically maps any samples or any slices within Quick Sampler to the step sequencer. So again, since I'm using triplets, I'm going to change this to 8th note triplet. I'll change the number of steps to 12, and I'll enter in a 4 on the floor kick pattern. Now let's say that I want to add like one little extra note, like right here maybe. In fact, I'm going to make this 24, and I'll add one little extra note here. I'll click on velocity and pull down the velocity. Let's see what that sounds like. Now another way to use Quick Sampler is you can actually use it to load up individual kit pieces from Drum Machine Designer. And in a future video coming up very shortly, I'm going to show you how you can use Quick Sampler inside of Drum Machine Designer. However, you can load up individual Drum Machine Designer kit pieces with Quick Sampler. You don't even need to load up the instrument like I did here. You just create a new software instrument track, go to your library, then go to Electronic Drum Kit, and if you scroll all the way to the bottom past all of these full drum kits, there's an option that says Kit Pieces. If you click there, you can choose individual drums. So I'll go with snares. I'll scroll down. I don't want any rim taps. I want like a full snare hit. And I'll try this topaz snare. Now, another cool thing about using Quick Sampler is that because it only has one sample, it will automatically interpolate the pitch of the sample if you play higher or lower. So you can use it for some pitched effects if you like. You can also load presets from the menu up here, but most of these are all like synthesizer presets because all of the drum presets are going to be over here in the library. I'm going to go ahead and just reload this, recall the default setting, and I'm going to drag in a different sample. I'm going to go to the loop library here, and I'm just going to search up snare. So here's this 80s power pop snare. This is actually a loop, so if I drag and drop this in, and if I'm in classic mode and I just hold down the key C3 where it's on right now, it's just going to play back that loop. So if I want to just isolate one snare drum from the loop, there's a couple different ways you can do this. One, you can edit the sample to just isolate one loop, or you can use slice mode and chop up the loop into individual samples. I'm going to show you how to use slice mode for something else in just a bit. So I'm going to go back to one-shot mode. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the snap function up here, and I'm going to set this to transient. And I'm going to trim this up to one of these snare hits. And I'll trim up the back end as well. Then I can add a quick fade to that. And now I've isolated just this one sample here. And by the way, I'm using a Magic Mouse right now. You can use the scroll function to scroll in or scroll out. And if you're using a trackpad, you can use a 2-finger pinch to zoom in or zoom out, or use the zoom controls in the upper right corner. Once you're done editing, you can just click on the sample and this will bring you back to the root key control here. So what I can do is set this to D1 where I want it. And let's see what this sounds like. Now, if I wanted this to be lower, I could actually roll the root key up. So by setting the root key higher and playing a note that's lower, so this is on G1 right now, but I'm actually playing D1, I'm going to get a detuned version of the sample. So you can intentionally do this if you want as well. I'm going to go ahead and do that, but maybe not that far up. Let's put this on F, and let's see what D1 sounds like. Yeah, it's a nice, punchy, deep snare. So off screen, I built a basic snare pattern here just on 2 and 4 with some extra notes, and I've played around with the pitch of the snare. So for hi-hat, what I'm going to do is grab a loop. So I'll just search up hi-hat here. Yeah, I think this angelic hi-hat topper will work. Now the thing is, this as a loop isn't really going to work because this is a straight feel loop, whereas my beat is a triplet feel. So fortunately with Quick Sampler, we can take a loop like this and we can turn it into something completely different. So I'll drag this down to the track header. I'll load this in Quick Sampler in original mode, delete the original sample or loop there, open up Quick Sampler, and load this up in slice mode if it's not already in slice mode. Now, the way slice mode works is by default starts on C1 and chops up each transient in the loop and maps it to a different key on the keyboard. So right now we're starting on C1, then C#1, D1, and so forth and so on, chromatically up the keyboard. So really there's just 2 samples here, like a more open hi-hat and a softer hat. That's not really, I guess it's not really more closed, it's just a softer sound. Now, if you don't like working chromatically, you can also change this to all white keys or all black keys. So now just the white keys will be used to map these samples. I'm going to pull down the velocity sensitivity, but one other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull down the sustain segment of the volume envelope, and I'll pull this forward a bit just so I have a really quick decay. And what this does is, this is the volume envelope, the main amplitude or volume envelope for the instrument. So depending on what changes you make to the volume envelope, this will shape the volume control of the instrument. But if you pull the sustain all the way down and you pull in the decay time, that's this little area right here, that's going to make the playback of the sample shorter. So imagine every single note you play having a quick little fade on it. I'll pull this back a little bit more. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is just create another pattern region. I will make this 8th note triplets. I'll make this a 12-step pattern. And you can see each of the slices are now a different lane or different row here in the step sequencer. I decided to pull the velocity sensitivity up there just a little bit because I wanted to pull down the velocity on these harder hits just to pull them down in the mix a bit. I'm also going to use note repeat in a couple spots just to give this a little bit of flavor here, just add some little rhythmic flair here and there. Next up, I want to create a bass line. And yes, you could always just go find some other bass instrument like an Alchemy or Retro Synth or the ES2. These are all great instruments for finding bass patches. But if you find a particular bass sound that you like and it's inside of a loop, you can isolate just one note of that loop and use it as a sound source to create your own bass instrument. So I've got this 80s game synth bass loop here. It sounds like this. And what I'm going to do is just drag this in here, and then I'm going to drag it onto the track header. And by the way, you can drag loops directly to the track header if you like. You don't actually have to put them in the tracks area first. So I'm going to open this up in Quick Sampler. And what it's done is it's chopped this up with slice mode, but I'm actually going to use classic mode. And I'm going to trim out one note here. So right now this is on C3. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim up this note right here, the lower note. It's easier to transpose low notes high and maintain, some level of quality than to transpose higher notes low. So I'm going to just trim this up right about there. And I'll go ahead and use my transient snap there. Now, I don't think that this note is on the correct pitch. It's definitely not on C3. It's definitely lower than that. It may be like C1 or C2, but there's a cool option in here. If you click here and then go to retune, what this will do is it'll determine the pitch of this note, and it'll also set it to the correct root key. So it's set this to G0, and it's detuned it by 8 cents. And if you want to verify that, you can always bring up your tuner plugin, which is under the metering category. And if you actually play that note, G0, you can verify that the note is correct, and indeed it is. Now, I think G0 is maybe a little too low. I'm actually going to go up 1 octave, so I'm going to set this to G1 instead. Another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set the polyphony to mono because this is a bass. I just want one note at a time. And I'm also going to just add a quick fade here so there's no pops or clicks in the audio. And I'm also going to pull the velocity sensitivity all the way down. Now off screen, I created just a really simple MIDI pattern here in the piano roll editor, just a simple bass line in A minor. So keep in mind, the other great thing about using loops in Quick Sampler is you have that ability to transpose the sample up or down, either using that retune function, or you can manually do it right here with the coarse tuning, or you can do it by adjusting its root key. So there's many different ways to transpose samples in Quick Sampler. But again, this allows me to use a sample that was not intended for A minor in the key of A minor. Now, right now, this is just going to give me really short single bass notes. I want sort of a repeating pattern. So what I'm going to do is bring up the arpeggiator. Now, if I just use the stock setting in the arpeggiator, it's not going to sound so great because I have a triplet groove grid with a 16th note arpeggiator. And it's just repeating the same note in 16th notes. So I'm going to go up to the preset menu here, and I'm going to use this triplet groove 1 preset. Now there's some notes here in the grid that are a bit fast at the end here. So I'm just going to pull out a couple of these just to slow that down, just have a couple quick notes in there. Now, if you want to fatten up your Quick Sampler patch even more, you can use its filter module, and it has several low pass, band pass, and high pass filters. I'm going to use this one called Low Pass 24 dB Lush Fat, And I'm going to pull up the drive significantly, pull down the cutoff frequency just a little bit, but then add some resonance, which is going to add some feedback at the cutoff frequency to give me some mid-range boost as well. Okay, so lastly, I want to show you how to chop up a synth loop and turn it into your own custom synth patch. The only thing that's tricky about this if you're using a loop is that you're going to be limited to the notes within the loop. However, you can transpose it to be in any key you like. So I've got this airbrushed heart lead synth. Sort of like a plucky synth lead. It's in C minor by default. So I'm going to drop this into Quick Sampler. And for this, I'm going to use slice mode, but you'll see that it's actually added too many slices. So I'm going to go ahead and just double click on some of these to get rid of them, just so I have one slice per note. And I'm going to set this to just white keys. I'm going to pull down the velocity sensitivity. Now, if the original loop was in C minor, but my example is in A minor, I'm going to need to transpose this up or down to fit the key. So again, going from C down to A, you would count down 1, 2, 3. So I need to transpose this down by 3 semitones. So I'm going to use the coarse tuning here and transpose this down by 3 semitones. Now, in advance, I already recorded a MIDI region here for this, and it sounds like this. Another thing you can do is turn on flex inside of Quick Sampler. And what this does is it allows you to control the playback speed of each of the slices. So if I want each of these slices to play back slower, I could choose to set these to half tempo or 1/4 tempo. Or if I wanted the playback speed faster, I could use a factor of 2, 4, or 8. What I'm going to do is grab the sustain stage of the volume envelope and pull this all the way down. And using this 2 times playback speed, I'm going to sort of make this a really plucky staccato synth sound. And then I can use this in conjunction with other effects. Maybe I want to add distortion to it just to sort of fatten it up a bit. And then I can add some delay. Here I'm just using the dual 8th note triplet delay. And lastly, don't forget about all of the great presets that are in here. There's some really interesting sounds and textures in here. So here I've loaded up one of the vocal presets called Pitch Up Vox. I've added a bit of a filter to it, and I've also added Chroma Verb for a bit of ambience. So that's Quick Sampler in Logic Pro. It's a really awesome instrument for building your own custom sample-based instruments without too much programming involved. In the next video, we're going to continue on with Quick Sampler, and I'll cover some of its more advanced features and modulation features. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to see more content like this. As always, thank you so much for the support, and thanks for watching.